Well, welcome everyone to our presentation on open architecture, curricular design, theory and practice. We have two primary purposes today, I think really, perhaps three really. First is to give you a brief introduction to what open architecture curricular design is, in case you are not familiar with it. Second is to introduce you to our forthcoming book from Georgetown University Press, due out, as we understand, July 1st on this same topic. And let's see if see if I can make my down arrows work here. There we go. Okay, so that's the cover of the book. It's coming out soon. So that will be the second purpose of our presentation today. And the third is that we're going to give you two good examples of different types of open architecture curricular design in very different contexts. I'll go over that in just a little bit. So maybe if we can get going. First of all, our presenters today, Maria Bondarenko, who you can see her information up there, has her degree from Russian State University for the Humanities. She's a Russian and French L2 instructor affiliated with University of Montreal and University of Heidelberg, where I believe you're at now, Maria. Research interest is in cognitive approaches to L2 teaching. And what is going to be particularly interesting in a presentation here is Maria's going to be demonstrating what you can do at the nexus between sociocultural approaches and cognitive approaches, dealing with the special needs of novice learners, especially of a language like Russian with its complex inflectional system. And then you should be able to see her email at the bottom there. All right. Betty Lou Lever, PhD, Pushkin Institute. Betty was the former provost of the Defense Language Institute Foreign Language Center, where her programs earned the American Association of University Administrators Kalayjian Award for Innovation in Higher Education. And that was all about open architecture curricular design. And Betty will be telling you more about that in just a little while. Betty has also administered language programs for NASA, the Institute of Technology in Jordan, and the Foreign Service Institute. All of these have played a role in the development of open architecture curricular design. Jeffrey Watson, PhD, Sociocultural Theory and Second Language Acquisition, Bryn Mawr College. He's now an associate professor of Russian and chair of linguistics and language acquisition in the Center for Languages, Cultures, and Regional Studies at the U.S. Military Academy of West Point. And you see his contact information below. As for myself, PhD, UCLA, currently professor emeritus at Defense Language Institute. My last position there was as an associate provost and director of our Office of Standardization and Academic Excellence. Before that, I was a research officer at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. Before that, adjunct associate professor of Slavic languages and literatures, UCLA, and assistant professor of Russian and linguistics at Pomona College. My research areas range from Slavic linguistics and philology, L2 learning, and investigating violations of international humanitarian law. And you can use either of my two email addresses below for contact, arcrmc at either Gmail or att.net. So today, first, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to OECD and to our forthcoming volume. Then I'll turn it over to Betty, who will give you a more in-depth look at the history and philosophical underpinnings of OECD and transformative language learning and teaching, for which OECD is a primary enabler. Then we'll turn over to Maria, who will discuss her spiral-like design for teaching inflectional languages at novice level in an OECD-enabled content-based course. Yes, Maria is going to be showing you how you can do content-based learning in an OECD environment with novice learners beginning really from the second week of class. So I think you'll be looking forward to that. And Jeff is going to be talking about OECD and macro strategies frameworks as an enabler for practical application of sociocultural theory in a college Russian course. Now, one of the things that Jeff is going to be doing is showing you how you can use open architecture curricular design in a course that otherwise has a mandated textbook, and you need to use that textbook, but you want to have ways of bringing in the benefits of OECD, and Jeff's going to be speaking to you about that today. So briefly, what is OECD? It's a textbook-free curricular design framework for L2 learning. It provides flexibility, and that flexibility enables you to integrate the application of recognized best practices in world language education. The bottom line is you're aiming to improve the efficiency of learning. So what does that look like in, I was going to say in practice, but I mean in principle? So really, we recognize four basic principles of OECD. The first is that instruction is organized independently of a textbook. Doesn't mean that you necessarily don't have a textbook, but instruction, at least in that portion of your course, is organized independently of it. Rather, learning is organized around a theme-based syllabus, this enables you to integrate interchangeable, unadapted, authentic text task activities from day one. Here I say typically it's modular in organization, not necessarily. The examples you'll see in the book are some are modular, some are not at all modular. And one thing to bear in mind that sometimes this causes a little bit of apprehension on those who are not used to OECD, especially for dealing with novices, is it eliminates, by definition, it eliminates linear scope and sequence because you're using authentic texts not sequenced essentially from day one. Maria will be showing you ways in which you could be dealing with this with your novice students. And yes, have your cake and eat it too. But what this does is it enables you to involve your learners in the selection and delivery of content and designing and directing the activities. Both Betty and Jeff will be showing you aspects of how that can be done. What this also enables is you continually and systematically tailor what your students are doing to their needs and the needs of their cohort. Because you're not tied to a specific textbook order, you're much freer to switch things out even in real time as need arises. Instructor then can evolve from a facilitator to a mentor and a coach. And this is something, again, that Betty will be also coming back to. The major idea of OECD is it enables you to integrate your application of, FLED, I should say, world language education practices. Just giving you just a brief list of some of those here. The idea is that the flexibility enables you to strategize to build more of these into each module or however your course is being organized. So let's take a brief look at the book itself. The first part of the book, the OECD framework single chapter, in which we will be discussing the concepts, origin, and range of applicability. In other words, this is the runs you through what it is, what OECD is, and some of the major questions concerning it. Deals with a conceptual background and its origins. It gives you your definition principles, and then turns to going over its range of applicability. And here's where we deal with a lot of the questions that typically arise in regard to OECD's applicability. In terms of learner variation, are all kinds of learners with different cognitive style profiles, different personalities, the globals and analytics, or as we would say in Ehrman and Lever terminology, actinics and synoptics. Yes, but there are certain challenges that you might encounter, and the chapter goes over those and shows you how you deal with them. Course size and intensity, big courses, small, multi-section, single section. These are all issues that have arisen, not issues, challenges and questions that have arisen, and we show you how to deal with them. Upper and lower proficiency. Now, OECD in its earlier applications was generally considered to be applicable at from approximately ILR 1 plus, that's ACTFL intermediate high and higher. But we've been finding more and more ways to use OECD at even lower, down to novice level. Several of the chapters in the book deal with ways to do this. Well, I'll be going over that in a moment with you. Instructor workload. There is a tendency for some instructors who are not used to using OECD to feel that it's imposing a very heavy workload on them. Instructors who are experienced in OECD rather feel the opposite. They realize that it actually lightens your workload. And the chapter shows you how that works. So, and institutional culture also can be another issue that we tackle. The second part deals with OECD in US government language institutes. Now here, institutes is represented by Defense Language Institute Foreign Language Center. You might sense that there's a heavier emphasis on government programs in this book, although there are quite a few from academic programs as well. Now, this government emphasis simply reflects the historical reality that OECD has been developed and formalized more in governmental than in academic environments. But the ultimate place for what the potential for OECD is out right in the academic world where most of the learners are and most of the programs are. So we have one of the Irene Krasner's is a Russian-focused one. Now, all of these chapters, whether they're Russian-focused or Korean-focused, Chinese, or whatever it is, are all very useful for teachers of Russian. Everything in these chapters is transferable. Irene deals with another way of using OECD with novice learners, applying the gradual release of responsibility model, gradually shifting the responsibility and organizational of activities from the instructor gradually over to the learner. And another Russian-oriented or partially Russian-oriented chapter is in chapter 8, which deals with distance learning with immersion students. You have immersion students who are doing study abroad overseas and doing open architecture courses that are managed by instructors back in the United States. It's fascinating. They show you examples from several languages, including Russian. Next section concerns, well, whoops, I jumped ahead of myself. That was a program at the U.S. Military Academy. Other chapters, now we move on to the academic programs, and several of these concern Russian. You'll be hearing from Jeff Watson in a little while. Rasina Soyan has a course that she discusses in performing the news, basically turning your students into almost like a little bit like a TV studio, not quite, but gives you that kind of idea. And Maria will be discussing her spiral-like design for doing CBI, content-based instruction, with novice students in just a little while. Then the final section deals with learning assessment, program evaluation, and management, and program management. Now, one of the key aspects of what open architecture design is it will shift you from a summative testing mode into an ever greater emphasis on formative assessment that was maximally integrated into your learning program so that your students can spend more time learning and less time test preparation and testing. So that in a nutshell is the structure of the book. Now, so, okay, is anything new about in OECD? You know, in a sense, there's nothing new under the sun. Not even the phrase, there's nothing new under the sun. It goes back to a Hellenistic era biblical text known as Ecclesiastes. So the individual practices that comprise OECD are generally what are considered best practices in learner-centered language instruction. In any case, you're simply trying to integrate their application. And not, well, sample modules, I won't be able to go into sample modules, but I think what Maria and Jeff will be showing you will get that idea across. Even the combined application, people have been doing OECD in practice for a long time, typically sporadically here and there, but it has been done. So what is new is both the recognition and the formalization of OECD as a distinct curricular design framework, recognizing that letting go of the textbook as a course anchor facilitates the combined and integrated application of learner-centered techniques. Ideas to create a force multiplication effect to enhance learning efficiency by exploiting the flexibility that OECD affords to maximally carry out this integration. So as my final slide, I'll just, in maybe a bottom line sense, OECD is a force multiplier. It provides the flexibility to integrate application of learner-centered approaches. And here's the big one: to freely adapt in real time, not waiting for your next iteration, not doing a lot of planning in between. You can adapt in real time, both your different learner and cohort profiles. Your learners, their needs are constantly evolving, and you can adjust to those needs on a essentially a as needed basis. And merging opportunities in the target language society, one of the chapters will be showing you how you can see where there we go. John Gregory, emulating proficiency increasing features of semester abroad experience through open architecture curricular design. John is going to show you how you can maintain proficiency gain that your students achieved while abroad through an open architecture curricular design back home again at West Point. And one of the things he's going to show you is how he could essentially turn on a dime to shift his courses activities to deal with a new, very important event in Chinese cultural and political affairs, just on basically just switch one activity out for another, essentially on time. So I think that's it. And I won't go into any backup slides. I'm going to stop sharing and pass the baton to Betty.
So, as Andrew said, I will try to go through the history and philosophical underpinnings of OECD, and transformative language learning are a whole lot easier than the history. It took me quite a bit when you live the history, you don't record all the pieces and you forget things. And a lot of history is oral history. It doesn't get written down and never appears in print. So it's really hard to track it down, even with all the wonderful AI instruments we have. So I've done my best. I probably have missed some important things, but I've done my best to identify where it all came from. So if we look at TLLT, transformative language learning and teaching, of which OECD is an enabler, I think there are three, historically speaking, is like a stool that has three legs. So we have transformative philosophy, which dates from the mid-'80s. We have transformative education, which dates from the 1990s. And OECD, and basically the concepts of open architecture in general, which comes out of computer systems. And that, as applied to language for the most part, as a term came about in early 2000s, but actually I'm going to show, I think it actually started through an American Council's program back in the 90s. Not recorded, just in people's minds. Unfortunately, a lot of history is when the people leave this life, they take it with them. I tried to record some of it. So, but first, let's look a little bit of definitions. transformative learning it's a paradigm shift, and a way of thinking about things and reacting to things that change. Kuhn talked about paradigm shifts in life in general. Um, we have gone through three as far as language training is concerned, at least as far as anyone thinks. We've gone through transmission, which was centuries long, which focused on delivering knowledge and skills. Then we went through transaction, and these things just really mean what they say. I'm transmitting from you. I'm the knower, and you're the learner, and I'm just giving you what I know, and you regurgitate it. That's transmission. And transaction is okay. Let's do things together. Let's get some tasks done. Let's get some note. That's where some of the emotional functional learning started. Was the concepts of transaction. That's where our communicative approaches come from. And transformation aims at inspiring personal growth and changes in how learners perceive things. Obviously, study abroad is a great transformer. Um, that's one of the things that most students will tell you they changed their mindset. But it actually, historically, we've had two different streams. One was a transformative educational philosophy, which I list as a TP leg, and that was K-12. And that came a little bit earlier. And that looked at self-awareness, critical thinking, and connecting knowledge and personal experience. Um, and that's pretty much a lot of that came out of Freire, who talked about using the knowledge of the street in the classroom. And then transformative education, I don't think these folks knew each other. Miller and Seller, who talked about transformative educational philosophy, were course developers in K-12, and transformative education came out of adult education, Columbia University, Jack Mesereau, and I don't think that he was familiar with the work of Miller and Seller. No, it never mentions it in any of his own work. So I think it was just how there are no new ideas, as Andrew said, nothing new under the sun, just two different fields coming up with a very similar thing. And Mesereau went into a very sophisticated form of looking at 10 phases, but essentially it's having something that disorients you, which happens in you can't avoid in good study abroad programs, critically thinking about it, growing from a result of it, reintegrating all of that in who you are and how you see the universe, and you end up with a change frame of reference. And transformative language learning and teaching pretty much pulls in both those forms of transformation. So briefly, I'm not going to go through this whole slide because it takes much more than 20 minutes just to get through it. But it kind of shows you in a graphic what those differences are. So with transmission, we're just after knowledge. And Andrew said I was going to talk about the role of the teacher. I didn't know I was, so let me just add it here. The teacher's role in transmission is to be the authority figure. And that's a bad place to be because I don't know about you, but I don't always know everything. So I get questions I can't answer. So I don't like that position. In the transaction world, it's the emphasis is on being able to do something, not to know it. You look it up or just get the skills. And the teacher's role then becomes that of facilitator. This is the one that probably most folks who are at least younger than I am, which is most everybody, came into the field at the field of language teaching focused on the communicative approaches. And transformation as a goal says you want to change someone, you want to become, the student wants to become something else, and that's your change frame of reference. I threw down the names of some of the people involved, and I will be very happy to send the slide set if you want to look up any of these works. You can see that 18th, 19th, 20th century is all have advocates for transmission. And then I'm not sure advocates just the way it was done. And transaction, and you see the names you expect to see with communicative approaches and transformation, the two different worlds. And the various activities. The one thing I would point out is that content-based is I'm kind of one of the content-based gurus. It can go anywhere. You can use it with transmission, transaction, transformation. It's been mostly used with transaction, but Maria is using it with transformation. So, and OECD. And the tests look different. Transmission tests, you want to know what they learned. It's a very, very discrete item. Transaction, you want to know what they've been able to do, and so you look at it more of a formative way. And transformation is usually diagnostic. Not only what can you do, but how far, the zone of CPD, where zone of proximal development, what next can you do? What are you almost at, and what's too big a step? So that's why you get a lot of diagnostic instruction. Now that's a lot of stuff in about 2 minutes. So anybody wants to talk about it more, I'll be happy to. That's the core of the shifts over time. So let's talk about first transformation, and I'm not going to go a lot deeply into the what's here. I just want to give the historical background. So transformation as an education philosophy. I mentioned Miller and Seller, who are K-12 curricular designers, who proposed these three paradigm shifts, and they basically focused on transformation as the way to go. And then in the late 1980s is when you get transformer educational philosophy. That was interestingly very concurrent with CBI, content-based, and TBI, task-based. Authentic materials were all going learner-centered at that time. And diagnostic assessment. The late 1980s was a very rich time for change happening in L2. Then we get the 1990s. Neil Granoyan, the late Neil Granoyan, unfortunately, and I, with through the auspices of American Council for International Education, we spent a lot of time in various Russian cities, talking about educational philosophy and transmission. I'm sorry, transformation, and the first issue of Philosophia Obrazovania, which is not just on language. We weren't focused just on language. We were focused on K-16 topics. The first issue of that carried our article on transformative philosophy. And I point this out because, I'm not trying to be, well, maybe I am. The actor Baraban. I don't know if I'm trying to beat that, but there was a real important contribution that I'm not sure without actors' involvement that we would be where we are today. And I've always said, and I really don't think I'm prejudiced. I've worked with 20, 30 different language programs in terms of languages, Chinese, French, German, whatever. And the Russians have always been ahead of the game. They've always been the leaders. And I can go into reasons why I think that, but Andrew's showing me 10 minutes, so I won't. And then in 2006, this is when things kind of got interesting and OECD actually started. We got the transformative education period, that kind of a sandwich period at DLI. And basically that's when a lot of authentic emergent experiences came out. And that's when Mesereau started being taught in our faculty development programs. 2010 plus is when you started seeing it popping up, the concepts of OECD and transformative education popping up first in Australia, then Ireland, finally in the United States. Corey Crane and Stacey Johnson did a chapter that in the transformative language learning and teaching book that Christine Campbell, Dan Davidson, and I edited. And that was some of the beginnings. That was some of the transfer. So the beginnings, I think, were the 1990s, when we had programs in Moldova and Uzbekistan, pre-internet, were using authentic materials only, whatever they could scrape up, but you couldn't scrape up enough this was for English language. So we had shared paper archives, and they actually made copies. Each country made copies of their own archives and sent them to the other country, which then doubled what they had for materials. This was before anything else was available. And actually, sometimes not having things, helps you be creative and come up with better things. The OA term was first adopted at DLI, I'm pretty sure in 2006, because it shows up in the Board of Visitors report in 2007. I haven't seen it anywhere in print before then. And it was integrated with content-based, task-based, transformative learning, and based on authentic experiences. It evolved organically. This was not something that was planned. It was an organic evolution. Started out with CE, which was the intermediate advanced programs that also had branch campuses. Spread to other divisions, word of mouth. The CE students did spectacularly. We had students reaching 3+ and 4, and that just caught people's attention. And so it started spreading just because there was interest. And curriculum development division had show and tell series where teachers would come in on Wednesdays and show the program, show their open architecture classes and how they did them. So it was very semi-informal, actually. And then it formalized, and we brought the undergraduate deans into the loop. We established an advanced language academy that actually had other people than just DLI there, brought in other agencies. And I mentioned these names only because you'll see them again. It was myself, Dan Davis, and Christine Campbell were the main instructors of that academy. And then Jeff King was a keynote speaker at our faculty development that year, development day. So how it expanded into all the way from then to our book is that we had Annie Dodarian did the first article in which she mentions open architecture. It's in a trade journal, and she had been an Arabic instructor at DLI, went out, I think it was University of Michigan, and took OA there. And then these two folks down in Brazil working in K-12, K-16 education suggested the term. And then those names I told you, those were that I mentioned earlier that were at the academy, at the Advanced Language Academy. Dan and Christine and I, we edited this book on transformative learning and found some fantastic authors chapter authors who've been working in the area. And then the last thing to happen is that this book on open architecture will be out in just a couple months. And that's it. And here's some references if you need them. The important ones that I mentioned are here. Did I make it, Andrew?
You did, with a minute to spare.
Oh, wow. That's great.
So I'll steal your minute now, and just to mention that for those who are interested in a more detailed account of both the conceptual and the practical origins of OECD, this is all there in the first chapter to the upcoming volume. So it's going to be there. Obviously, much more than we can do in a conference presentation like this. So I guess without further ado, let's move over to Maria. You're our next presenter to show us how this can work with novices, no less.
Hello, everyone. As Andrew announced, my role here to share with you my experience of implementation of OECD to teach in Russian at low beginners level. And first, before I starting, I would like to thank you, Dr. Corin and Dr. Lever, for this amazing opportunity of participating in the forthcoming volume and in this panel. I would like to remind you that open architecture curriculum design supports many branches of the communicative language teaching paradigm, including content-based language learning. And the content-based language learning has different models. And within this presentation, I'm going to speak about the theme-based courses applicable as we think to law proficiency courses. Also, the content-based teaching is based on the content, which is what is being said rather how it's said. Actually, content is not, it's wrong to think that content is opposed to form. Instead, it is integrated into, the form is integrated into the content. However, it still focuses on the content. I would like to remind you the place of the OECD among other features related to the CBLL. Among others, we can find it student-centered, learners' participation in developing syllabus and activities, which requires learners' needs analysis as a foundation of the syllabus. Also, the usage of authentic materials and technology, providing access to such materials. Learning activities, as Betty just explained, are based on post-method transformative pedagogy that is based on exploration and experimentation, and we use also open-ended task and investigation-like activities. Today, OECD integrated into CBLL has been applied mostly at a low proficiency level, started from intermediate. That is related to the cognitive challenges the learners face at the early stages of second language acquisition, especially for languages with complex morphological structures that typologically differ from learners' first language. Languages with a strong inflectional structure, like Russian, especially at the beginner's level, require developing strong procedural skills in the usage of grammar pattern, new grammar patterns. And that involves specific cognitive resources and therefore specific instructional procedures, which are repetition-based activities. And the question thus arises is the CBLL assisted by OECD compatible with Russian language instruction and low proficiency level? And my answer to this question, based on my experience and reflection, is yes. We can successfully implement this approach by amalgamating the principles of open architecture with some techniques drawn from cognitive L2 pedagogy that address beginners' needs through facilitating the internal process of learning. Hopefully, both CBLA and OA CD are not fixed but flexible to be adopted. Here is my outcome, my product of such amalgamating. I called the spiral-like design or matryoshka-like design. This design aims to guide language development at low proficiency level through selection, combination, recycling, drawing attention to form, and gradually enriched and expanded reproduction of language patterns within learner's zone of proximal development. I suggest also combine the spiral-like design with oral modeling approach borrowed from the neurolinguistic approach to language teaching. You can see here that this approach suggests a design feature such as literacy cycle based on oral input-output within a learner-teacher dialogue, followed by writing activities and reading activities coming back to the oral discussion. And some additional features, such as the usage of cognates, visual support to make authentic text accessible, technology for access to authentic material, and also different activities based on multiple repetition of patterns in natural context, and of course metalinguistic and metacognitive discussion to increase linguistic and cognitive awareness of learners. Here is the representation of the final product of such amalgamating. You can see that the learning teaching module starts with a pre-task based on oral dialogue between teachers and learners. Then we move to the task itself, an activity based on reasoning or information gap. Students search to answer to a question by exploring authentic resources or adapted resources based on authentic one. Then they present and discuss the result orally. It's important to receive corrective feedback from the teacher in the form of recasting. Then they move to I'm sorry, it's not the the right way. We move to writing task. It's important. Basically, at the low proficiency level, learners write down what they just said with some adjustment. Then we move to reading task, and the final stage closure in the form of metalinguistic or metacognitive discussion aiming at synthesizing learning gain, both related to content and language, and reflecting on learning experience. And then we repeat. An important part of this design in the center, especially relevant for beginners, this cycle can be interrupted at any moment when we need it to provide learners some additional explanation, additional metalinguistic comments according to their need that make the structure flexible. And now some samples of instructional material I designed initially within the summer intensive language program of the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Montreal. This module was taught during the second week of this semester, not semester, of the program, after 20-30 contact hours of instruction within a weekly theme-based syllabus, richness and poverty in Russia, exploring housing condition. And later I had a lot of opportunity to reproduce this design within a different educational settings, which was non-intensive, 3 hours per week, university instruction at the University of Montreal. As mentioned, the design start with students, a survey about students' interest. And surprisingly, we received two major topics: food first, and after that, history, Soviet life, social customs, Russian and Soviet mentality. This was an inspiration to create a module based on exploring housing condition in contemporary Russia related to Soviet Russia. The transition point between the content of the first week and second week was the homework, a composition, student written during the weekend. They summarized on what they learned previously, and the topic was my, sorry in Russian, мой дом, my home, what is mean for me, what is mean in America. So my city, my family, my friends, my room, and so on. Individual aspect, and the learners was suggesting to move on the concept of my house in a social perspective. So the pre-task, I remind you, in the form of oral teacher-learning dialogues, what's like this one. I am showing you some slides from the real classroom. Как вы знаете, как и где живут русские люди? Вы хотите знать? Да, я хочу знать. This small dialogue was an opportunity for inputting the plural of adjective and the verb хотеть. The learners met this verb for the first time and start to practice it only in two form. Хотите, хочу. Вы хотите, да, я хочу. Первый вопрос, the teacher's question. Как вы думаете, в России есть бедные и богатые люди? Что значит бедные и богатые? The opportunity to be to learn some vocabulary and suffix, abstract suffix ost and stvo. To answer to this question, the learners was suggest to explore this chart with one new vocabulary items of Plata and come out with the answer да, в России есть богатые и бедные люди. The reading part and writing part, they write down a text and read it again and again the question, какие регионы в России самые богатые и самые бедные? The new form is самый, хотите знать? Да, я хочу. And learner search the answer to this question through exploration. They chart, they find, follow the link provided by teacher. It's important that they use the authentic material. They come with the answer, they write down, but firstly, they formulate it in oral way and write down. And the next task cycle begins with the new discussion. Почему Ямало-Ненецкий автономный округ богатый? Как вы думаете, что там есть? Applying their knowledge and their cognitive skills, they come out with the answer, потому что там есть газ и нефть. Practicing the known structure like там есть, тут есть, газ, нефть, the root, rod, this opportunity to enrich their vocabulary knowledge. The same for the the poorest region, exploration about Ivanovo city, почему Иваново бедный, какая там традиционная индустрия, and suggesting to explore a Wikipedia article about Ivanovo city, providing their герб and flag, this машиностроение, not текстильная индустрия, это индустрия номер один в городе Иваново. What I'm telling now, this is the expected answer from Lauren. So in this way, we continue exploration a different topic, housing phenomena in Russian, коммуналка, хрущевка, with some culture-related additional materials such as operetta Москва-Черемушки composed by Shostakovich and so on, and some social issues related question, what can we do with this cheap housing such as it's not Kommunalka, it's Khrushchevka, progress. What is renovation project? What is the problem with renovation project? Is money, and so on. So we can continue this discussion by adding additional topics using cognates and checking the level of students' understanding, students' cognitive and emotional involvement. We can suggest them to see together or as a part of homework, a documentalny film, and then discuss it. We can ask him about the relationship between housing condition and mentality, and everything is in Russian. So the important conclusion, the important lesson from this experience is the understanding there's the openness, the concept of openness of the OECD is related not only to curricula based on learners' interest and linguistic patterns introduced in the order of their appearance in authentic materials, but also to the openness of the classroom activity itself. At the beginning of the well-prepared module, the teacher has only a general idea about the final product based on ongoing observation of learners' performance, the emotional and cognitive involvement. The teacher must be ready to modify at any moment the scenario, slow down or accelerate the pacing, and introducing mentioned above intertask at any moment the beginner's learner needed. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Maria. And of course, as with will be the case with Jeff's presentation, I will warmly recommend that you can go to the to the book itself, and you can see fuller documentation of these experiments and experiences, and you can get a better idea of this intertask concept, which is really a wonderful way of enabling the content-based experience for your novice level students. At this point, I'll turn over to Jeff.
All right, good afternoon. Let me share my slides here. I do teach currently at West Point, but I think it's important to point out that this study was carried out when I was a teaching assistant in a second-year Russian class at Bryn Mawr College under the supervision of the illustrious Dan Davidson. So Dan, I'm very proud to say that finally, after so many years, I finally got around to publishing some of my dissertation work. And that's where this study came from, chapter 9 in the volume. The impetus of the study was the long-standing gap between the sociocultural theory and application of sociocultural theory tenets in a practical classroom environment. Obviously, we don't have time to go into depth about the tenets of sociocultural theory, but a lot of them align well with OECD. The first step, of course, is to translate the sociocultural theory tenets into a practical framework that we can then apply to a classroom environment. So I chose the macro strategies framework, and I kind of modified Kumaravedavelu's framework into these 5 areas: foster and enhance learner self-awareness, account for individual differences, promoting strategic self-regulation, learning affordances, collaborative problem solving, and fostering multidimensional language awareness. I will revisit that framework at the end when I discuss the results of the program. But when I was brainstorming away from just translating the theory into a practical framework, I also needed to think about the specific environment that I was teaching in at the moment, and that was an environment where a textbook was mandated And yet I realized that if we are to apply this macro strategies framework, it really requires more flexibility and adaptability, a modular approach. And as you can see, a lot of the principles of open architecture curricular design aligns well with the sociocultural theory. So there's a lot of learner involvement, a lot of learner-centered attention, task-based, content-based learning, a lot of focus on self-regulation and learner autonomy. So that's what I brought together. The research methodology was a small class, 4 sophomores, 1 freshman. We met 7 hours a week. 5 of those were, of course, dedicated to mostly vocabulary and grammar, but we also had 2 hours dedicated to conversation and culture. The materials, this is where the mandated textbook comes into play, because we were using the Russian Stage 2 textbook, but I was also supplementing that material with some modules developed with authentic material. That involves some poetry, level-specific poetry, some Russian popular music videos, some film reviews from newspapers, that sort of thing that I brought in to supplement the textbook material, which we also processed in a unique way. For data collection, as is typical with most action research, a lot of teacher observation. I recorded the classes on video, and then I went back and I analyzed the video and listened in to what was going on in the interactions there. The students had to complete reflection journals after each unit. Also held some post-course interviews and a survey as well. I won't get into all of that data, but it is available in the chapter. So similar to what Dr. Bondarenko was talking about, the modular learning plan is a fluid process, and it repeats itself at several points throughout the semester. We start, of course, with curricular goals, discussing the materials, assigning the materials that we need. I suggested certain daily lesson plans based on the content of the textbook, but we negotiated that learning plan with the students. So the students got to choose which material to focus on, which vocabulary, which grammar to focus on. They identified areas of strengths and weaknesses, so a type of needs analysis that repeated itself in a regular fashion. And then, of course, we had interactive, collaborative, task-based classroom modules and learning projects that the students got to choose from every day of class. So the classroom environment involved 5 phases. The first phase was more or less at the beginning of the course, where we had some strategy training. The cadets filled out some surveys about their learning styles and their strategies, their preferences. So that gave us a chance to raise their awareness about learner autonomy and self-regulation and that sort of thing. The next one was the creation of or the negotiation of a learning plan. It was our way of setting a goal. So at the beginning of every unit from the textbook, I handed out a handout in class where it listed the topics, the grammar topics, the sociocultural topics, all the vocabulary that was presented in that unit. And the students got to put a check mark next to the ones that they felt they were pretty comfortable with, and maybe a check minus next to the ones where they weren't so comfortable with it. And that helped me prioritize the topics that we would focus on from that unit. Once we had that prioritization down, I would develop modules, and this was a lot of work, by the way. On the front end, it was a lot of work. Once you do it once, though, you can reuse this material, and the process became more, I would say it became easier over time, right? So I would design these modular exercises. I designed stations that were set up around the classroom. that focused on a different aspect of the learner's individual differences. So if we had some analytical learners in the classroom, and we had one global learner, and I knew that the global learner liked to do more exploration and experimentation with the language. So I always tried to have a station set up in the room where they could choose one that had more of an experimental focus. One maybe was dedicated to listening, so I would bring in some of the listening exercises from the textbook. Maybe one was involved with writing, more of a written exercise involving cloze activities or fill in the gap, that sort of thing. And the learners at the beginning were instructed to work in pairs for that collaborative, interactive aspect, but they also had to negotiate among themselves to see who wanted to work with them and to attend which station in the room. So the stations were set up. They had to complete at least 2 stations during every task. So they had to find somebody, and it shifted pretty much on a daily basis, weekly basis. The cadets, or I'm sorry, not the cadets, but the students would choose a different partner, and then they would rotate to at least 2 different stations. The goal was to facilitate what Leo Van Leer called triadic interaction. So interaction with a tool. Some tool was a textbook, sometimes it was a listening task, sometimes it was a video task. And I would rotate around the room to provide the modeling and to provide corrective feedback as I noticed it. The students collaborated to complete the exercises, and then they prepared a handout or a slide that we could display to the course for them to present the material back to their peers, right? So that they could reflect on the experience in the moment and also explain what they learned from those experiences to the class. And then we would discuss those experiences as a group. I would carry out modeling and corrective feedback as with the group as a whole. And it seemed to be a very effective way, and I'll talk about the results of that in a moment. At the end of each unit, I had the students reflect on their experiences. They had to write 1 to 2 structured reflections in their journals based on structured prompts. And I used that data at the end to analyze the effectiveness of the design. So the results, to provide some context for the results, I used the macro strategy elements again, slightly different based on the observed data and the data from the journals, data from the videos that I recorded, and as well as interviews and surveys that the students filled out at the end. So in terms of promoting learner autonomy, they did exhibit more autonomy. They seem to enjoy negotiating the course elements and repeating that exercise on a regular basis. They demonstrated more self-awareness. One of them mentioned that it helped them understand my expectations as a teacher. And I didn't really foresee that being the case, but they mentioned that without being prompted, that this layout and this repetition of this fluid learning model help them better understand what I expected of them and help them gain more from, just to avoid those mismatches between learner and teacher expectations. Obviously, there was a lot of accounting for the individual differences. They started to look forward to the negotiating and choosing tasks based on their preferences. There was improved autonomy. Let's see if I'll talk about that in a second. Yeah, so also learning affordances. Leo Van Leer talks about affordances instead of learning opportunities, because affordances are something that they not only use in the classroom, but they take with them outside the classroom. So it encourages learning to happen, ongoing learning, even outside the classroom. They appreciated being involved in the decision-making during the task selection phase. They were more motivated. There was more investment in the process. They appreciated the authentic materials. They liked the Russian pop music videos. They were talking about them at the beginning of class, how they would listen to them outside of class just for enjoyment or to review the material that we had learned in that specific task prior. Obviously, there was a lot of collaborative problem solving. One thing that I noticed over time was that the students preferred to work individually first. So although I mandated that they work in a pair or a group at the beginning of the course, eventually that, because of feedback from the learners, I shifted that and allowed them to work individually on the material first and then to collaborate. So this really gets to the heart of scaffolding, working within your zone of proximal development, apprenticeship. You work individually to see what you can do alone, but then you can see what you can do in collaboration with others in order to internalize the material. So that is something that shifted over time based on learner engagement and learner involvement. And lastly, my goal was to promote multidimensional language awareness. So even at that second year level, where we are still focusing a lot on grammatical competence, lexical competence, they did show more awareness of language's cultural embeddedness. So the film reviews were something current, something modern that they could relate to. The Agnia Barto poetry was just about right at their level. And of course, the pop music videos were something that they could relate to and allowed them to engage and invest more in the learning process. So those are the main results. That is the end of my information. I would encourage you to see more details about how I translated the sociocultural theory tenets into a macro strategies framework and how I used the modular OECD principles to design the course. I've got examples of the course materials in the appendices. So I encourage you all to take a look at the chapter, and if you have any follow-up questions, I would love to talk about it more, even by email. Please reach out. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And to our other participants as well. So we have some time left for discussion. And before I open the discussion, I just wanted to ask whether any of our participants have any back and forth reactions before we move on. Okay, well then let's do we have any questions? I think there are few enough that we can just please speak up, and if we have more than one person, we'll just see whose voice comes up first. All right. Okay, let's see if we. Oh,
Dan
okay.
Davis
Yes, Dan.
Okay. I thought I raised my hand, and I want to thank all the members of the panel for splendid presentations. We're very excited about the appearance of the book. It couldn't be coming any sooner because it definitely its time has come. So thank you all for the contributions, and as always, thank you, Betty, for the fundamentalna работа that underlies the work that so much of us do. Jeff, I've had an observation as I heard you discussing the kind of the step-by-step scaffolding that your students ended up performing, and you commented how they wanted to have that time to themselves first to work and then move into the small group, and then I suppose from there into life after that. But what it reminded me of is a model that perhaps you've already thought about, which is the way that the Harvard case method is actually performed or staged at the Harvard Business School. The school uses residential model, 24/7 immersion model, in which the residences are divided up into what they call pods. And so each individual student reads material and then discusses it first in the small pod before they finally take it into the big lecture hall and the whiteboard. And when the case is sort of at that point then constructed from zero, in the large hall, but you kind of see that kind of staging of the preparation and the learning as the trainees kind of advance in their own sophistication. It just struck me as a possible interesting parallel for what you were observing as well.
Yeah, I think that's I think it's a very natural thing that as humans, most of the learning that we do, that we undergo, it involves facing a problem individually and then turning to someone for help or advice or assistance, right? So there's only so much we can do alone before we need some assistance to help internalize the behavior or the learning. And I was very delighted to see that. I didn't anticipate that happening because I wanted to encourage more interaction and collaboration. But the students requested that over time. So I thought that was a very interesting point as well.
Thanks for that point. Thanks very much.
Okay. Yeah, and Dan, my apologies. Yes, your hand was absolutely up. Yes, you'd think I use Zoom enough these days. I should be looking for the hands that are raised, and I'm just okay. So any other questions from the audience? I don't see any other hands up, but of course, none of the other faces are shown. So perhaps if I can be maybe a little bit provocative here, since we have a little bit of time before us, and when I think about the whys of why we are doing what we are doing, why there was such a pressure felt, or especially in the government organizations, to achieve, to set in motion the kind of the developments that led to open architecture, curricular design. It's this constant need to press for ever higher proficiency outcomes. And of course, now, today we recognize we're not merely looking for enhanced language proficiency outcomes, but for enhanced socio-cultural competencies on the part of our students, to have those proficiencies as well, and to push them as far as possible. Because let's face it, in the government institutes, your students are going out there and they're going to have to do real jobs. And how well they do those jobs is going to depend on what their proficiencies are when they leave the institute and when they complete their follow-up training. So perhaps that's the key. And one of the bottom line concepts here is to get our students, give our students the opportunity to get as high as they can over the course of their learning. The earlier that they can reach the earlier stages of proficiency, the earlier and the better chance they have of reaching the higher levels. Now, and this then brings us to this concept of the inverted pyramid, which has been kind of ingrained in our consciousness for several decades now. And one of the things that we hope we can do by opening up the architecture of our curricula is to look for ways to strategize to undermine that that concept of the inverted pyramid. If you let me just go back to its origins, and it's the if you I grew up developed as a language instructor and later manager on this idea that this was something that had a strong research basis, that it was essentially an inevitability and you had to get used to it. But then we realized that there are certain facts that don't quite fit with the idea that this inverted pyramid is a universal of language learning. It's something that I think in some of Betty's earlier writing, she recognized that there are two different types of learners based essentially on their cognitive styles, which you can call the rabbits and the hares. Now, I don't mean to steal any of Betty's thunder here. Betty, you can jump in at any moment. But the idea is that there are some students who are terribly slow, and we encountered this. It causes terrible difficulties at DLI. We have students who have a hard time early on. These are typically your actinic students. But later on, if they can manage to hang in there and reach the earlier stages of proficiency, suddenly, especially from around level 2 up, they will just shoot forward. There are others who develop initially very fast and then become what we refer to as terribly fluent. And these students are going to have more of a tendency to plateau when they get maybe right around that level 2, a little above, but you can have a hard time reaching 3 and especially above. And so this doesn't really fit with the idea of the inverted pyramid. And go on, but that's one. And then we look at the origins of it. It actually all just goes back to a paper written by a man named Robert Vincent in 1978 at a symposium. He was associated, I don't know if he actually worked there, with the CIA language school. And basically he came up with this idea from just mathematical modeling that instructors, the experiences of CIA language instructors over several generations had been that yes, your students will get to level, one, I think in ILR terms, they'll get to intermediate after one period of time, they'll get to advanced at a much longer period of time, and far greater period of time to the superior. And he essentially found that this model to essentially an exponential model. A couple of years later, Ray Clifford took this and turned it into this graphic model of the inverted pyramid. And there have been several different variations on this pyramid, some with edges that kind of go out like this, some where the edges are straight with different numbers of facets to the pyramid. But the idea is originally this was a descriptive device. It described the experiences of language instructors who had been working for several decades with earlier forms of language instruction. There was nothing inevitable about it in its original formulation. But over time, it had this tendency to be transformed into this idea of something that it's inevitable and it has to be. But we're trying to get beyond that, and opening up the architecture of your curricula is one way of doing this, because we've had tremendous advances in the concepts and practices of language learning over quite a number of decades now, especially since the 70s and onwards. But then if you look from this pioneering study by John Carroll back in 1967, when you look at it, it doesn't seem that in later decades that the learners were getting to much higher levels of proficiency. Of course, Carroll wasn't working with actual proficiency levels back then, so you have to essentially estimate the kind of the relationship between his results and actual proficiency result. But any way you look at it, it looked like there just wasn't that much changing. And so one of the major kind of aha moments for some of us who've been working with OECD is that maybe there's something in the organization of instruction that doesn't enable you to fully exploit all of these new developments and concepts and practices of language learning. And so opening up your curriculum is one way to in a major way to address this. And based on some of the outcomes that we've managed to see attained, in some cases attain them ourselves through our own students, but otherwise observe them happening. So it shows us that you can do better, and this is one of our major impetus here. And it's not to say that fantastic things haven't been happening, outside of the government institutes. I mean, language flagship, I mean, has done tremendous amount. Their students, now, of course, now I'm stealing Dan's thunder here. This is something that I know, Dan, that you've written on, that the students who participate in the capstone year abroad now can generally will achieve level 3. So, okay, I'm using up too much time. I don't know, Dan, do you have any reaction, or Betty, either?
This is something that we have written about, and I agree with you entirely that there's something paradigm blasting about the flagship program that has been able to show across critical languages, Arabic, Mandarin, Farsi, Russian, Korean, Portuguese, and Turkish, that with the right kind of training and interventions, an undergraduate student, even one who has never studied a language before and did not speak it at home, can, over the course of 4 undergraduate years, achieve a 3, not just in speaking, but at least in case of Russian, 333, along with majoring in any field, right? It doesn't have to be tied to some total consumption in a Russian major. A rather small percentage of our folks actually major in the language, but they do them. But well, sometimes they do. But that this is possible, and it can be done in the normal amount of time. So I agree with you that it takes a kind of a breaking away from a lot of the established assumptions, and a willingness to invest a little bit in summer intensive training, right? It's not that the time on task goes away. Time on task is still very, very important. It's probably the same exact, but it can be organized in a different way, and it takes a different mindset. So I'm agreeing with you, Andrew, entirely that it can be done, and it is being done, not only in government but in external programs like these. Overseas immersion is a big lever for us, as you know. It's a motivator, it's a shocker, it's a transformer, and it takes all the levels of support. But what you see is not only what we're seeing is that with higher language proficiency, we're also getting incrementally higher IDI scores and capacities across all the typical evidentiary domains that you expect in intercultural competence. So you're looking not only at an attitudinal shift, behavioral modification, that language is an affordance of intercultural development at this level. And if the government's need, as we know it is to produce people who can basically deal with other cultures and know how they work, understand how things get done, maintain relationships over rocky periods of time. That's what you need if you're going to have someone out there in the field doing important high stakes work. And the language is a critical affordance. That's what we're seeing from flagship. That it's a big help.
Thank you. Yes, it's an exciting time to be involved.
Yeah.
It very much is. So I think we have probably expended all of our time, and I think Irina is going to want to close us out here. Yes. Okay. Right. Okay. So.
We're just about to wrap up, but it was great that there was so much really, really valuable material shared here.